The night the storm hit Red Creek was like nothing Lila Harper had ever felt before. The wind tore through the valley with a ferocity that made the old cabin shudder, rattling its wooden walls as though it were trying to warn her. Lightning forked. Across the sky, illuminating the forest outside in blinding flashes, and in each brief moment of light, she imagined shadowy figures moving between the trees. Her heart hammered in her chest, her fingers gripping the edge of the rough pine table, as if it could anchor her to the world. She had always been alone out here on the edge of civilization, but tonight the loneliness felt different. It was heavy, suffocating, and tinged with danger. Then came the knock. Soft at first, almost lost in the roar of the storm, but insistent. Lila froze, a chill crawling up her spine despite the fire burning low in the hearth. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the latch, listening to the sound of the wind like a chorus of ghosts. Another knock, louder this time, made her jump. Something told her this was no ordinary traveler seeking shelter from the storm. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she slowly opened the door. Outside, standing in the downpour, was a man unlike anyone she had ever seen. Rain plastered his long black hair to his shoulders, and his dark eyes burning with intensity and an almost untamed wildness met hers. His bare chest glistened with rain, muscles taut under the firelight spilling from her cabin, and he exuded a raw, magnetic presence that made her knees threaten to buckle. He was an Apache warrior, she realized instantly, though how he had come to her remote cabin in the middle of nowhere she could not imagine. "I need shelter," he said, voice low and gravelly, carrying authority and urgency at once. Something primal stirred in her chest, a mixture of fear and fascination. She stepped aside wordlessly, letting him in. The storm seemed to shrink away once he was inside, replaced by the heat of the fire and the electricity of tension crackling between them. He removed his quiver and longbow with a grace that seemed almost ceremonial, bowing his head slightly in respect, though his eyes never left hers. Hours passed with little conversation. The warrior was quiet, and Lila, despite the storm outside, found herself drawn to his silent presence. He was unlike anyone she had ever known, dangerous, powerful, and yet not cruel. The warmth of the fire mirrored the heat growing between them, a force that neither could resist. Lila felt the ache of longing she had never acknowledged, a hunger for something more than her simple, lonely life. And he, though he said nothing, responded in kind, his gaze lingering on her with an intensity that made her pulse stutter. Storm raged outside, lightning cracking, wind howling, and the cabin seemed to shrink around them until there was nothing but firelight, rain, and the taut electricity in the air. In that moment, Lila knew she was on the edge of something forbidden, yet irresistible. One touch became a brush of hands, a brush became a caress, and soon their lips met, trembling with a hunger both shocking and inevitable. The night unfolded. With a passion neither had anticipated, a collision of two lives that would leave a mark neither could forget. When dawn finally broke, the storm retreated over the mountains, leaving the forest washed in soft gold. Lila awoke alone, the fire reduced to glowing embers, the warrior gone as if he had never been. All that remained was the memory of his touch, the echo of his voice, and a strange hollow in her heart she could neither name nor ignore. She wandered to the edge of the cabin, looking out over the mist-laden valley, the wind whispering secrets she could not yet understand. Somewhere in the forest he had vanished, but the impact of that single night would linger far longer than either of them could imagine. The air was quiet now, almost eerily so, and Lila felt the first pang of what would come to define her future, a secret that would grow inside her, unseen, unknown, until the time was right for it to be revealed. The days after that stormy night blurred into months, and the months into years. Lila Harper tried to bury the memory of the Apache warrior, though it haunted her like the ghost of a fire that refused to die. She rebuilt her life with the quiet determination of someone who had learned to survive in the unforgiving wilderness of Red Creek. Her cabin became a haven not just for herself but for the small town on the edge of the valley. She mended clothes, delivered letters, and occasionally helped care for children whose parents were too busy with work or worry. Yet no laughter, no clatter of daily life could fill the hollow he had left behind. Sometimes she would close her eyes and see him standing in the doorway, drenched, muscles glistening, eyes dark and smoldering as if the storm itself had taken human form. The memory both thrilled and terrified her, a private fire she could neither share nor extinguish. Life pressed on, ordinary and safe, yet unpredictable in its own quiet ways. Lila became adept at hiding her solitude, laughing with neighbors, helping with chores, and even joining the town's small gatherings. Still, when she returned to her cabin alone, the silence felt thicker, and she often found herself staring at the empty doorway, wondering if it would ever open again. Then, slowly, a new presence began to make itself known, not a person, but a truth that Lila could no longer deny. Her body betrayed her with subtle changes at first: nausea, an unshakable fatigue, a strange, intimate sense of growing life within her. When the unmistakable signs became undeniable, she realized the impossible truth: she was with child. The father, she knew in her heart, was the warrior who had come to her on that stormy night. Her heart raced with both awe and fear. She had never spoken of that night to anyone. Her parents had long passed, and the townspeople, though kind in their way, would not understand. Secrets were dangerous, and this one carried weight beyond her years. Lila feared the gossip, the judgment, and the whispered questions that would inevitably follow if anyone discovered the child's true parentage. She feared the warrior might never return, that the child would grow up without knowing the father who had once claimed her, heart and body in a single night of passion. And yet there was pride too, an undeniable warmth that filled her whenever she thought of the life growing inside her. It was a reminder that her body had carried more than fear and loneliness, it had carried hope. She imagined what the child might look like: dark, curious eyes, strong features, hair like the night, perhaps even the same quiet intensity that had struck her the first night they met. Lila's days became a careful balance between routine and anticipation. She continued her work as a seamstress, her fingers dancing over fabric, stitching seams with the precision of someone used to crafting order out of chaos. She watched the children of the town, studying their habits and their laughter, imagining the life her own child might have. And all the while, she kept her secret close to her chest. A delicate ember, she feared, would flare into uncontrollable fire if exposed too soon. Jonas, her childhood friend, noticed the subtle changes. He watched her with quiet concern, his feelings for her buried beneath layers of politeness and habit. He suspected nothing of the child she carried, yet he offered comfort in his own way, unaware that Lila's heart and body had already been claimed by another, a man far removed from the ordinary lives of the townsfolk. The seasons changed. The forest whispered in the wind. Snow fell in delicate sheets, melting into the creek, carrying memories of storms past and promises of the future. And somewhere, across the valleys and mountains, the Apache warrior lived his own life, unaware that the seed of their night together had taken root, that a child he had never known was slowly growing, carrying a legacy neither of them could yet see. The years between had been long, quiet, and full of longing. Lila knew in her heart that the day would come when the past could no longer be ignored, when the echoes of that night would return like the wind itself, unstoppable and undeniable. Until then, she waited, preparing herself and her home for whatever fate might bring, guarding the secret that would one day change everything. For years, the Apache warrior had lived under the wide skies of distant lands, among forests and mesas that mirrored the rugged beauty of Red Creek. Yet no horizon, no mountain ridge, no river bend could soothe the relentless pull in his chest. The memory of that stormy night, the firelight dancing on her skin, the curve of her lips, the intensity of her gaze haunted him like a flame that refused to die. Somewhere in the winds and the whispering grass, he felt it, a life he had helped create, growing silently in a cabin far away. He had tried to bury it under duty, under the endless tasks of his tribe, under the battles that demanded strength and skill. Yet something inside him knew that what he had left behind was not just a fleeting encounter, it was a bond, invisible yet undeniable, tying him to the woman he had touched for one night of passion. He could not ignore it. News traveled slowly in the Old West, but it did travel. Traders and wandering scouts spoke of a young woman living alone near Red Creek, known for her quiet resilience and her subtle beauty. The Apache warrior listened to the whispers of the wind and the stories carried across valleys, piecing together the fragments. He felt his pulse quicken at the thought of returning, of seeing her once more, of discovering the truth of the life that had grown from that single, impossible night. Meanwhile, Lila Harper felt the first signs that something was stirring beyond her understanding. It started small, strange tracks in the forest, hoof prints pressed deep into soft earth, unusual rustlings among the pines. At first, she dismissed them as animals or wandering cowboys. But then feathers appeared, delicate and black, caught on the edges of fences and tangled in the branches near her cabin. Each one made her heart skip a beat, though she could not explain why. Her child, now a small, curious toddler with bright eyes and wild brown hair, would point at the tracks with excitement. "Who's there, Mama?" the little one would ask. And Lila would smile nervously, brushing the hair from their forehead, hiding the truth even from herself. Something was coming. She sensed it, a force from the past, both terrifying and thrilling. The air around Red Creek seemed charged, electric with anticipation. At night, the wind carried whispers that sounded almost like voices, and Lila would lie awake, listening, her heart thudding against her ribs. She felt the pull of something greater than herself, a presence she could neither see nor fully understand. Memories of that single night, once fleeting, now surged through her with clarity, the intensity, the fire, the touch that had changed her life forever. And somewhere, across valleys, mountains, and rivers, he was coming. The Apache warrior rode hard, cutting across forests and plains with the skill of one who had mastered the land. His muscles tensed with every galloping stride, eyes scanning for a cabin near a creek, his mind filled with the image of her and the life he had left behind. He imagined the child, too, how she or he might look, how their presence would anchor him to a world he had long wandered. Lila, meanwhile, noticed other signs, subtle things that tugged at her intuition. A shadow on the ridge, a glimpse of movement in the trees, the faint, lingering scent of leather and smoke carried on the breeze. Her pulse quickened every time she sensed it, though she dared not hope too much. The years had taught her caution, had taught her to survive on her own. Yet deep down, she knew that this presence was not ordinary. It was him. The first day of spring arrived, and with it, the river swelled from melting snow, rushing and frothing like the emotions stirring in both their hearts. Lila felt an unspoken understanding, a promise that the past could no longer remain buried. The threads of fate, spun long ago on a stormy night, were weaving themselves together once more, drawing the warrior back to Red Creek, to her, and to the child whose very existence had become the silent heartbeat of both their lives. In the quiet of the forest, the wind carried a single truth. Some bonds cannot be broken, some nights cannot be forgotten, and some destinies are too powerful to escape. It was mid-afternoon when he finally appeared. Lila was tending to her small garden near the creek, the child playing at her feet, tossing pebbles into the rushing water. The sun glinted off the river, and the wind carried the scent of pine and damp earth, but the serenity could not mask the sudden tension that prickled her skin. Something or someone was coming. At first, she saw only movement on the ridge above the creek. Shadows shifted, horse hooves striking the earth with quiet authority. Then she recognized him. The Apache warrior she had not seen for years, whose image had haunted her nights and whose presence had never truly left her mind, was riding slowly toward her. His bare chest gleamed in the afternoon sun, the muscles taut and powerful under skin glistening with sweat, adorned with bone necklaces, leather armbands, and feathers that fluttered in the breeze. His eyes, dark, intense, and impossibly familiar, locked on hers. The child froze mid-throw, pebbles tumbling from tiny fingers, and looked up at the stranger with wide, curious eyes. Lila's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to run, to hide, yet her legs felt rooted to the earth. The warrior dismounted, each step measured, deliberate, yet reverent, as if approaching sacred ground. When he stopped a few feet away, Lila could see the wind lifting strands of his long black hair, his expression unreadable but fierce with emotion. "Lila," he said, his voice low, carrying the weight of years and distance. The single word resonated through the quiet valley like the echo of a bell, awakening memories she had tried to forget. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She could only nod, stunned, her heart hammering against her ribs. The warrior knelt slowly, bringing himself to eye level with the child. His gaze softened as he studied the small figure, dark eyes scanning features, hair, and gestures that mirrored Lila's own. The child reached out instinctively, and he touched the tiny hand, a cautious smile brushing his lips. "Who are you?" the child asked, voice trembling with curiosity. The warrior's deep chuckle rumbled like distant thunder. "Someone who knows you already," he said carefully, his words deliberate, though he left the truth unsaid. Lila felt a rush of emotions, relief, fear, longing, and a strange, aching hope. They stood in silence, the years apart dissolving into a single taut moment. Memories of the stormy night, the firelight, the wind, the heat of their bodies came rushing back, unbidden and overwhelming. Lila's hands trembled as she reached for the child, bringing them close, shielding them with a maternal instinct she hadn't fully realized until now. The warrior straightened, eyes never leaving Lila. There was longing in that gaze, raw and unashamed, mingled with the unmistakable realization that time had not diminished the bond forged between them. He had returned not just to see her, but to confront the consequences of the night that had changed both their lives forever. "Why now?" Lila finally whispered, voice hoarse from years of silence. He took a slow step closer, the wind tugging at his hair and the feathers on his shoulders. "Because some things cannot be left behind," he said simply. "Because I have felt it, and I cannot ignore it any longer." The child tugged at Lila's skirt, curiosity warring with shyness. And she looked down at them, then back at the warrior. Her chest ached with a mixture of fear and desire, knowing that their reunion was no accident but fate itself manifesting. For a long moment, they simply watched each other, two lives intersecting again after years of separation. The creek gurgled. Softly nearby, the wind whispered through the pines, and the sun dipped slightly, casting long shadows across the valley. The tension in the air was electric, filled with questions that could only be answered by trust, courage, and the reckoning of the past. Finally, the warrior reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from Lila's face. Their eyes met, and in that instant, the years apart evaporated. The child, sensing the connection, giggled and clung to Lila's side, The warrior's gaze softened, and for the first time since he had arrived, there was a sense of possibility of family, of reconciliation, of something neither of them had dared to hope for until now. The encounter at Red Creek had begun, a meeting suspended between past and future, where every heartbeat carried the promise of change, and every glance carried the weight of the night that had brought them together. The air between them remained taut, charged with unspoken words and the weight of years. The Apache warrior stood by the creek, his bare chest glistening in the dappled sunlight, eyes locked on Lila as if he were trying to memorize every detail, every nuance that time had not erased. She held her child close, feeling the steady heartbeat against her chest, a tiny drum echoing the rhythm of her own fear and longing. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and deliberate, carrying both authority and vulnerability. "I should not have left," he admitted, his gaze unwavering. "A duty, my people. The paths I had to walk, they demanded it. I did not choose distance, I was forced into it." Lila's heart ached. For years she had blamed herself, had cursed fate for separating them, not realizing that forces beyond either of their control had intervened. Now, hearing him speak, the old anger melted into something more complicated, a mixture of relief, sorrow, and longing. She nodded slowly, unable to find words strong enough to capture the years of emotions pent up inside her. "You? You have a child," he said cautiously, his eyes softening as they fell on the small figure clinging to Lila's skirts. The child looked up at him with wide, trusting eyes, and he smiled, a rare, gentle expression that revealed the tenderness beneath the warrior's hardened exterior. "This is yours," Lila said quietly, as though speaking the truth aloud might. "Make it vanish." The warrior knelt, letting the child's small hand brush against his weathered fingers. His touch was careful, reverent, as though he were touching something sacred. The child giggled, a sound so pure and innocent it seemed to brighten the shaded forest around them. For the first time since that night years ago, the warrior allowed himself to imagine what could have been, what might yet be. He remembered the fire, the storm, the stolen hours of intimacy, and he felt a pang of regret mixed with awe. "You were carrying me with you," he murmured, almost to himself, and Lila's eyes filled with tears. She stepped closer, letting the child remain near the warrior, a bridge between their past and the life now standing before them. "Yes," she whispered. "All this time, I've carried a part of you, even when I thought I was alone." He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his thumb lingering on her cheek. The gesture, small yet intimate, carried years of suppressed emotion, longing, fear, desire, and a love that had never truly faded. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world around them, the creek, the trees, the wind disappeared. It was only the three of them, connected by a single night of passion that had grown into something far larger than either could have anticipated. The warrior straightened and looked at Lila with a mixture of awe and determination. "I should have returned sooner," he said, his voice firmer now. "But I was afraid of what I might find, afraid of the consequences. Yet here you are, and here is our child. There is no longer any reason to hide from what has always been." Lila felt a wave of relief and fear crash over her simultaneously. Relief that the man who had haunted her dreams for years had finally returned. Fear for the challenges that lay ahead, whispers of townsfolk, judgment, and the uncertainty of how their lives could merge after so much time. But beneath it all, there was hope, fragile yet persistent. Like the first green shoots after a long winter, the child giggled again, tugging at the warrior's hand, and he laughed, a deep, resonant sound that filled the clearing. For the first time in years, the tension that had weighed on them all seemed to ease, replaced by a tentative, growing connection. They spoke in hushed tones, sharing stories of the years apart, revealing the hardships and triumphs, the mundane and extraordinary events that had shaped them. As the sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the creek, the warrior extended his hand to Lila, not as a stranger, not as a man from a distant night, but as someone willing to step fully into her world, into the life of the child he had never known. And as she took his hand, a silent promise passed between them, that they would face whatever came together, bound not just by a past encounter, but by the life they had created and the love that had endured across time. Life at Red Creek might have seemed peaceful to outsiders, but the quiet had always been fragile, balanced on a knife's edge between survival and chaos. For Lila, the return of the Apache warrior brought relief, hope, and the warmth of family, but it also carried the risk of stirring the envy and greed that simmered in nearby towns. It began subtly, with shadows moving just beyond the tree line, strange figures glimpsed from the corner of her eye. Horses that had no owner left tracks near her cabin, and whispers floated on the wind, hinting at men who coveted her land, her resources, and perhaps the small fortune she had quietly built through years of hard work. Lila felt a prickle of unease, a reminder that the Old West was unforgiving and peace was often temporary. The Apache warriors sensed it first. One morning, while scouting the ridge above the creek, he noticed the tracks of multiple men converging toward the cabin. His eyes narrowed, muscles coiled in anticipation. He had spent a lifetime reading the land and the intentions of those who dared trespass. This was no random wandering. These men were organized, motivated, and dangerous. He returned to the cabin with urgency. "They are coming," he warned, his voice calm but firm. Lila felt a shiver run down her spine, but she nodded, trusting the warrior's instincts. The child clung to her side, sensing the tension, eyes wide with curiosity and fear. The Apache warrior moved with methodical precision. He set up the perimeter, using his knowledge of the forest to create natural barriers, selecting vantage points, and ensuring that any approach would be visible long before the intruders could strike. Lila assisted as best she could, gathering supplies, barricading windows, and readying herself to protect her child. When the men arrived, they did so with crude confidence, unaware of the force they had challenged. They were a group of land-hungry settlers, greedy and reckless, thinking the isolated cabin an easy target. But the Apache warrior waited like a shadow among the pines, muscles tense, bow in hand, eyes scanning for the perfect moment to strike. The clash began suddenly. A single arrow whistled through the air, nailing a hat to a post, startling the intruders. The warrior moved like lightning, swift and precise, using his strength and agility to disarm and intimidate. Lila watched, heart pounding, as the man she had loved for a single night years ago transformed into a formidable protector. Each movement was deliberate, calculated, demonstrating a mastery of both instinct and experience. The intruders soon realized they faced more than a lone woman. They faced a force that seemed to command the land itself. The creek, the trees, and the rocky terrain all became instruments of defense under the warrior's guidance. One by one, the attackers faltered, retreating in awe and fear at the raw power and strategic brilliance before them. By dusk, the danger had passed. The men had fled, leaving their plans and their arrogance behind. The warrior stood by the creek, chest heaving, muscles glistening with sweat, eyes scanning the horizon for any remaining threat. Lila approached, her child in her arms, and placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her palm. "You saved us," she whispered, her voice full of gratitude and awe. "No," he said, shaking his head, a small wry smile brushing his lips. "We saved each other, and we will continue to do so, no matter what comes." For the first time since his return, there was a sense of calm between them. The threat had been met, The bond between them solidified, not just by love, but by shared survival and courage. Red Creek was no longer just a place of solitude. It had become a home defended by strength, strategy, and the undeniable connection between Lila, her child, and the warrior who had once vanished in a storm but now stood firmly by her side. As night fell, the forest quieted once more. Fireflies danced above the creek, and the moon cast a silver glow over the cabin. The Apache warrior knelt by the water, gazing at his reflection, seeing the life he had helped protect and the family he could now claim. Lila stood beside him, and the child, tired but safe, slept peacefully. In that moment, amidst the wild beauty of Red Creek, they understood that their bond was no longer fragile, it was unbreakable, forged in passion, separation, and the fires of danger. The night air over Red Creek was cool and still, a gentle contrast to the chaos of the previous day. Lila Harper sat on the wooden porch of her cabin, the child sleeping in her arms, the moonlight casting silver shadows across the clearing. Creek babbled softly nearby, and the wind rustled the pines, carrying the faint scent of pine sap and the earthy aroma of wet soil. It was peaceful, but the tranquility carried a weight, a promise of new beginnings forged from past storms. The Apache warrior stood a few paces away, shirtless and glistening in the moonlight, long black hair lifted slightly by the breeze. The tribal jewelry he wore, bone necklaces, leather armbands, and feathers, caught the light, glinting with every subtle movement. His gaze, dark and intense, never left Lila or the child. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to breathe fully, to feel a sense of home, not just in the land but in the life he had returned to claim. "Are you sure they won't return?" Layla asked quietly, her voice tinged with concern, though her eyes reflected trust. He shook his head slowly, a calm authority in every movement. "No one will trouble us here again, not while I am near. Red Creek is ours to protect." The child stirred, yawning and stretching, then looked up at the warrior with wide, curious eyes. A smile lit up his face, softening the sharp lines of a life spent in struggle and battle. The child reached out instinctively, and he knelt, letting the small hand slip into his larger, calloused one. The connection was immediate, undeniable, a living bridge between past and present, between a single night of passion and the family that had grown from it. Layla rose and stepped closer, her heart pounding not from fear, but from anticipation, and the quiet, steady pulse of love that had never left her. She placed her free hand on the warrior's shoulder, feeling the heat and strength beneath her palm. "You've returned," she whispered, almost to herself, "and we are here, together." His dark eyes softened, glimmering with a mixture of awe, relief, and desire. "I never left," he said quietly. "I carried you. And this child, with me, every step of the way." The child giggled, crawling into his lap, and the warrior laughed a low, resonant sound that filled the clearing and mingled with the soft murmur of the creek. Lila watched them, a profound sense of completeness settling over her. The years of longing, the solitude, the uncertainty had all led to this moment. A family reunited, stronger for every trial endured. As dawn approached, the first light of day began to warm the valley, casting a golden glow over the mountains and the creek. Birds stirred in the trees, singing the familiar songs of morning, and the wind whispered promises of the life ahead. The warrior stood, lifting the child, holding them aloft so they could see the rising sun. Lila reached out, taking his hand, and together they watched as the new day began. The past, with its storms, secrets, and separation, was behind them. The future stretched ahead, filled with possibilities, laughter, and the quiet strength of love that had survived against all odds. Lila felt a sense of peace she had never known, a conviction that whatever challenges might come, they would face them together. The warrior knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We have a life now," he said, his voice low and steady. "A family. And this land, our home, is ours to protect." Lila nodded, tears glimmering in her eyes, not of sorrow but of joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Together, always." The child reached out, grasping both of their hands, and in that simple act, the bond was sealed, a family forged in fire and storm, in love and survival. Red Creek, once a place of solitude and longing, had become a sanctuary, a symbol of resilience, hope, and the enduring power of connection. As the sun climbed higher, bathing the valley in golden light, Layla, the warrior, and their child stood together at the edge of the creek. The world around them seemed vast yet intimate, dangerous yet safe, a reflection of the journey they had endured. And for the first time in years, they faced it not as individuals marked by separation and loss, but as a family, united, unbreakable, and ready for whatever adventures awaited in the wide, untamed land of the Old West.